Hi everyone, I wanted to do a quick recap about the Puritans and give you some additional insights as we start the Crucible. So if you're taking notes, please feel free to stop this along the way. So the Puritans sought to purify the Church of England from within, and they believed that the Anglican Church of England had become too garish, too fancy, too focused on material items, and they asserted that the basic sinfulness of mankind, but declared that God had determined that some people would be saved despite their sins. So this is what the inside of a Puritan church might look like. You can see that the pews are separated. The men and women sat on different sides. It's very simple in its form. Puritanism was a way of life, a theocracy, and they really stressed self-discipline and introspection, looking at yourself. They saw their lives as a divine mission, that God gave them the new world because they were his chosen people. This is the precursor to the idea of manifest destiny, which was a 19th century doctrine or belief that the expansion of the United States throughout the American continents was both justified and inevitable. So the Puritans believed that the Bible was the supreme authority on earth, and they used the Bible to justify their occupation of the land and their use of force against Native Americans. The basic tenets of Puritanism is a judgmental God who rewards good and punishes evil. They believed in predestination. So your salvation or damnation was predetermined by God. They believed in original sin, that human beings are innately sinful. We have to learn to be good. They believed in providence, and they believed in God's grace. And they saw God's grace as a gift. Okay, that human beings were unworthy, but God still gives them grace. And their repentance or their sorrow, like personal salvation, depended on the grace of God. And that there were only certain people who would experience this. So this caused them to do a lot of self-reflection. They were constantly looking for evidence of their election. Like, am I good enough? Did God choose me? So guilt and remorse, they believed, were signs of God's grace. And thrift, industry, hard work were viewed also as signs of God's grace, along with business success. Now, unlike the Anglican and Catholic churches of the time, Puritan churches did not hold that all parish residents should be full church members. They were very exclusive, not inclusive. A true church, they believed, consisted not of everyone, but only of the elect. So again, these are people who have had a personal experience and experienced God themselves. Okay, so they actually were asked to testify to their personal experience of God, and this was done in writing and read to the church. These testimonies still exist today. To the Puritans, a person by nature, again, was wholly sinful and could achieve good only by severe and unremitting discipline. So hard work was considered a religious duty, and emphasis was laid on constant self-examination and self-discipline. And if the Puritans were not at work, likely they were at church or at prayer. And it's sort of this repressive society that scholars say it's little wonder the girls of Salem took advantage of the power they gained from accusing the elders who had previously controlled them. Now, the Puritans, again, believed in punishment. So they watched each other, and failures to observe the Sabbath day, blasphemy, fornication, drunkenness, games of chance, participation in theatrical performances, spreading gossip, all those things were punishable offenses. And public whippings and humiliation were very common for sinners. So I have a few to show you. In this first one, this man is wearing a sign. Now, perhaps the sign said something, or it may have had a letter on it. Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote a story called The Scarlet Letter, where a woman accused of adultery has to wear the scarlet A. So they'd have to wear this sign for a time. And people would gather. They would stand in the public square, and the community would make fun of them, laugh at them, point at them, spit at them, maybe even throw food. Okay, in this next picture, we have a picture of a stockade. So you see two people with their arms and legs in the stockade. This was usually used for those people who were in the lower classes, and they again had to do this in public, and so everyone could see them. It was again throwing food at them, laughing, spitting, saying things to them. The picture on the right is of a woman gagged, so that may have been given for spreading gossip, telling a lie, that sort of thing. The picture on the left here is a pillory, which is a lot like the stockade, except this allows the offender to stand and was usually reserved for those people who were in the upper class. The picture on the right is of someone being publicly whipped. This was reserved for men only. They also had branding, so this depended again on the crime. So, and the letter was associated with the crime that was committed. So, a T for a thief, D for drunkenness, A for adultery. Then we have the dunking stool. This was reserved for women only. Again, the crowd gathered to watch. A woman was placed in the chair and dunked in the river. Now, as we said before, the Puritans were highly educated. They were very literate people. Education was valued as a way to fight atheism, to instill in children the value of work. They established Harvard University. We've talked about that. They held the writing of history in high regard. They wrote narratives, journals, biographies, hymns, and sermons. And almost all of their writing was religiously based. We have an early picture of Harvard that was founded in 1636. In 1638, the first printing press was brought to the colonies. We had the first book published, the Bay Psalm book, and a popular poem in the colonies called The Day of Doom. It was about the world ending. We had people like Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams. These two people were reformers. So Anne Hutchinson was excommunicated from the church and driven out of the community. Roger Williams was banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony for challenging the strict religious code and the government's right to confiscate Native American land without compensation. So again, remember, he went on to found the colony of Providence in 1636. Quakers and other dissenters received very harsh punishments, including execution, for their beliefs. So again, the Puritans are very strict. In 1632, Lord Baltimore establishes the colony of Maryland as a haven for persecuted Roman Catholics. In 1636, colonists leave Puritan Massachusetts to seek religious freedom in Connecticut and Rhode Island. And in 1682, Quaker William Penn's Pennsylvania becomes a model of religious and political tolerance. So again, the Puritans honored material success. Wealth was considered a reward for living a virtuous life. They valued family life, community service, art, and literature. They were known to drink beer and other alcoholic beverages on occasion. However, one did not overindulge. By 1700, Puritanism was in decline for various reasons, and we've talked a little bit about these, but there were many Indian wars, and again, atrocities were committed on both sides. There was urbanization. More non-Puritans were joining the colonies. We have the Age of Reason, where people were attacking religion and focusing more on science and reason. And then we had the Salem witchcraft trials, which spread and into neighboring communities, and people were fearful. After the 17th century, the Puritans, as a political entity, largely disappeared, but their attitudes and ethics really continued to exert an influence on American society. The ideas of self-reliance, frugality, self-discipline, industry, all of those are important. Their concern for education was also important in the development of the United States, and the idea of congregational democratic church government. So again, it went by like majority rules. It wasn't just one person making the rules and deciding for everyone. And this was carried into political life of the state as a source for modern democracy. So 100 years after the Puritans came to colonial America for religious freedom, some Puritans felt that their congregations had grown too complacent or self-satisfied. And so to kind of rekindle this fervor that the early settlers had, Puritan ministers led the Great Awakening, and one minister was Jonathan Edwards. The Great Awakening lasts from 1734 to 1750. And Jonathan Edwards was a very forceful preacher and speaker, and he founded the College of New Jersey, which later became Princeton. He's considered the leader of the Great Awakening, and one of his most famous public lectures, if you will, sermons, is called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And Jonathan Edwards believed that he had the experience and the grace to, as one of God's elect, to serve the community. He was dismissed as a minister after publicly naming people who had lapsed in their devotion, including influential members of the community. So his sermon is a classic statement of the Puritan vision of heaven and hell, and it was 6 hours long. He delivered this in Connecticut, July 8th, 1741. It was very effective, and his audience literally shrieked and fainted. And he spoke in a very reserved manner. Now, the Salem witchcraft trials, 1692, we have several young Puritan girls who accuse a servant, Tituba, of being a witch. And in order to protect herself, she implicates other members of the community. This causes a chain reaction. 27 people are convicted of practicing witchcraft. 50 others, quote unquote, confess. 100 others are imprisoned, and by the end, 19 people were executed for being witches. So again, this is just kind of a snowball effect. Now, there were tests to see if someone was a witch, which you will be reading more about, but they would poke the person, look over their entire body, and also dunked people in water. Spectral evidence, so claiming that you saw someone's spirit, was also enough to accuse someone and sentence them to death.